Zoha, Minahil, Samad Aftab, Munira. I, Salman Asif, am available to all the 4 groups. I would be moving from one group to the other as a roving ambassador of yours and also taking down notes. So with this, the session is being led by Kavya. Over to you, Kavya.
This is actually Dory, but thank you. So just to see everyone. And just a moment for everyone, there's a request from the organizers. If everyone would be able to, just a moment, sorry, would be able to turn on your videos to take a quick group photo, a digital group photo. And can I request Hermes to, actually what I'll do is stop sharing.
Yes, I can take the photo. So I will give everyone another 10 seconds or so. If you would please turn on your camera and I will take the snap. I'll give you a good countdown so that you can have a big smile on your face. So I'll give everyone another 10 seconds to turn on your videos for this group photo, please. Okay, and I will go ahead and take a group photo in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you so much. Dory, back to you.
Our group photographer, thank you. So now we're going to, as Salman mentioned, we're going to move into the breakout portion of the event. You've all been randomly assigned a room, the 4 rooms I already mentioned. We had a quick review of the questions up on the screen for a little bit, but we'll also send them through the chat. And once you're in the breakout sessions, you'll also receive the chat, and your moderators will also have a virtual whiteboard with the questions there for you. So if you need any support, kindly write a private message, or you can also ask for support from the host. All right.
Dory, if I may step in as well,
of course.
Just very briefly. So the questions that are in the chat will also go with you to your breakout room. And just a quick note, Minahil, I have sent you another link just to look at. So you use the link in your chat. That is the latest one for you. Okay, back to you, Dory. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Hermes. All right. Everyone will be briefly in their breakout rooms.
Colleagues, we are all here now.
Hello.
Hi. So colleagues, we are all here now in the main hall room, all together. Thank you very much indeed. And I had the happy opportunity of roving from one group to the other. And it was, and to be part of your informed and informative, inspired and inspiring inputs. Thank you very much indeed for that. So we are back together now, and we'll move on without further ado to group presentations. With this, if I may invite, we can start from the reverse order. If we could start from the group number 1, moderated by Ms. Munira. The forum is entirely yours. Group number 4, moderated by Ms. Munira, to share their collective reflections.
Thank you so much, Salman Sahib. Gabriella from my group would present our discussion. So if Gabriella could be given, could be unmuted, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gabriela, and well, we treated the main 4 questions and about the most pressing business and human rights issues in Pakistan. We found out mainly child labor, war harassment, informal economy, main issues about unequal representation regarding women and marginalized groups, also occupational health and safety issues, and lack of access to work and remedies, mainly because the lack of accessibilities. Regarding the key obstacles and drivers that we need to face, we found out also the lack of awareness among vulnerable groups, education, rights-based education, and labor rights. Also, we found out that inclusion of women and in the labor market will be also a main thing to just overlook and face and try to improve. And also, it's very important, in our opinion, to focus on the inclusion of marginalized communities and indigenous populations. Regarding the 3 concrete recommendations that we need to provide, we came to the conclusion that making due diligence for big business compulsory will help instead of making them voluntary. Also, CSR shouldn't practice on short-term goals, but mainly on long-term. And we think we should introduce policies so natural habitat isn't disturbed. That's our environmental point of view, just trying to include that also in these 3 bullet points. Regarding the stakeholders, we thought about the chambers of commerce, regarding different sectors, the labor and economic ministries, and also other ministries involved in human rights issues. The Ministry of Human Rights and the provincial departments, and UN Global Compact, and finally also national and provincial human rights institutions. That's all.
That's very kind. Thank you very much, Claire, precise and concise. I will now request group number 3, led by our moderator, Ms. Zoha, to share their collective wisdom, please.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Salman. Ms. Lizette Wasman will be presenting on our behalf.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So there is some overlap with the previous group, of course. So in terms of business and human rights issue, we came up with the lack of the voice of workers being heard, non-payment of minimum wages, lack of implementation, also lack of enforcement of the labor codes, and no access to grievance mechanism. Key obstacles and drivers are mainly lack of capacity, the business buy-in. A driver could be setting up a multi-stakeholder initiative. We discussed extensively about that, because then you have all different stakeholders together in a room, including NGO and trade unions and the government. And then also coming up with a good business case and providing incentives and support to small, medium enterprises. Recommendations is also the mandatory human rights due diligence, maybe also for small, medium enterprises and not only the multinationals or the big firms, but then together also with voluntary initiatives. So like a smart mix of both initiatives, capacity building of all relevant entities, allocating enough resources, strong enforcement mechanism and simple grievance redressal frameworks so that it's easier for workers also to access them. And also take input from other countries where they already have maybe initiative like multi-stakeholder initiative and learn from them. And then the last questions, the key stakeholders are the government and the different ministries, NGOs and trade unions. Also take use of front-runner businesses who already are really believing in the agenda of business and human rights and use them to promote it towards their businesses. And then also human rights institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I would now invite group number 2, led by the moderator, Ms. Manahil, please, for your collective wisdom to be shared here.
Thank you, Salman Saab. We were actually mid discussion when we were removed from the breakout room. So I just wanted a quick, I just wanted to ask my team if they're fine with me presenting or if they would like to present. I haven't heard anything from them. So I think I'll just go on and in order to save time, I'll just quickly present on our findings. We came to the conclusion that some of the most pressing business and human rights issues in the country right now are child labor, and our labor standards, the fact that they're not implemented. And this is the primary issue right now, that we do have a very robust legal framework in relation to labor issues, in relation to gender equality, inclusivity, as well as child labor. But what we don't have is coherent implementation of those laws. We also looked into, health as a component which needs to be considered more vigorously, and within that, mental health, especially with when we're looking at larger corporations, and how this is something which is mostly sidestepped. And then, of course, what we need is robust grievance redressal mechanisms. That is something which is crucial, because with a lot of these organizations and with a lot of business entities, they don't have the capacity to deal with human rights issues. And they don't know how to deal with a human rights grievance that comes up, whether it's harassment or any other issue. And in relation to the obstacles relating to the promotion of business and human rights, I think the primary obstacle is the fact that there is very little awareness on this. And I think our group kind of decided that, there is, because there is such a large informal economy in Pakistan, they don't really have, they don't have access to basic law and policy. And that's something that is going to really hamper the implementation of the business, is going to hamper implementation and also awareness of the business and human rights connection. And of course, tying in with our first point regarding pressing human rights issues, we have capacity issues within organizations relating to human rights grievances, where through the different strata, a lot of people don't have access to grievance mechanisms, because they're either not part of the corporate structure, they fall outside it, or simply because they don't know of it. And then one very important point that was noted by one of our representatives was that there is a gap between education and practical work. So when they're students, when people are being taught, they're not really being taught regarding the rights that they have, and that's something that needs to be changed as well. And that is something that really might hamper the implementation of the BHR and National Action Plan and agenda. In terms of recommendations, the most solid recommendation, or the one recommendation that we were all unified on, was that we need a proper registration mechanism, and it needs to be easy for businesses, especially which work within the gray area, where they're not entirely, where they're part of the informal economy, but they can be formalized. But because registration mechanisms are laborious, most of them choose not to be registered. And this is very important because only when businesses are registered will we be able to monitor their human rights compliance. And of course, for this, more than what businesses need to do, I think the government and the state really needs to aid businesses, provide them with concessions, provide them with initiatives, perhaps maybe tax relief as well for those businesses that conduct human rights due diligence. And then, of course, there needs to be the point on forums for easy mechanisms and complaint registration mechanisms is something that businesses need to have. And this is something that needs government and state oversight as well, that there needs to be a very solid complaint mechanism where people, especially labor, can register their grievances. And in relation to key stakeholders, I think we came to this conclusion fairly early in our discussion that the Chamber of Commerce can play a very vital role in creating awareness on laws and remedies, sector specific and that. And then, of course, your ministry and provincial departments of human rights will play a very important role, considering the National Action Plan also takes this into consideration. And provinces have played a very major and vital role in the development of this National Action Plan. And then, of course, the Small Medium Development Authority can also help, especially with regards to, to what we've discussed in the plenary also, that, there's a lot of informality. There's so many smaller, medium-sized businesses. So how do you sort of encourage them to conduct and to embed the human rights standards in their activity? And that was all from our group. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Minahil, and your group. We'll now proceed on to hear from the group number 1, led by Samad Aftab. Over to you, Samad, and your group.
Thank you so much, Salman Saab. So Nida Usman from our group will be presenting our discussion. Over to you, Nida.
Thank you. There is a lot of overlap because the issues are all from Pakistan, but I guess our group was able to identify the impact of religious extremism related human rights impact in Pakistan on the international exports and the perception, because obviously this is a big problem that our businesses and as well as obviously human rights have to deal with and address. Of course, access to remedy is seriously missing the inclusion of women and marginalized communities in the justice sector. So I think major challenge is to secure fair representation of the classes that are not yet represented in the justice sector. As that will obviously improve the whole framework. And the point number 3 is obviously related to that overall within the business culture also, there needs to be a diversity so that, representation can come in those channels of, decisions where business decisions are being made or policies are being made. So even their diversity needs to be addressed. Of course, tech was emphasized as a solution that could remove certain barriers, and I think that ensuring is minimized is one way that we can bridge the gap between business and human rights in the country. But alongside that, it's important to look at the data protection privacy laws as well, because tech is a sword, it's a double-edged sword. So these were some of the pressing human rights and business issues that we've been able to identify. The obstacles look like cause of awareness about business and human rights still, and there needs to be a strategic move to generate awareness of business and human rights across stakeholders, which includes the civil society, I would like to say here, because constantly in our conversation, we are saying laborers in business and government, but they're consumers and they're civil society at large as well. So I think that this needs to be, the stakeholders need to be broadened. There are gaps in capacity to implement and enforce. And I think Pakistan as a state needs to work on this capacity to be able to fully implement and do justice to what is on paper. In terms of drivers, we can link the National Action Plan with the SDGs, which they've already done so, but to other international commitments as well. And the idea is to encourage the businesses by not over-regulating them, but to ensure that the whole idea of compliance is seen as an investment. And for that, obviously, we'll go to the third point as well, which is in the third question. So if we can go to that part of the screen, I'll be able to guide you better on that. So the idea is, if we can go down to question number 3 that we had to answer. So how can you actually ensure that businesses respect a bit of a carrot and a stick approach? So the incentives obviously need to be spelled out, but if the government can come up with a more cooperative way of ensuring compliance, such as giving tax breaks or badges or certificates or awards for compliance, I think that can be an incentive. Regulating the informal sector to curtail abuses is very, very important, and workers can be given a stronger voice, which obviously brings us to workers' unions and trade unions and associations. But I think this, again, the stakeholders need to be broadened, and civil society at large and environmental groups need to be brought in as well to track the climate change impact of businesses. And finally, in terms of the stakeholders, the usual suspects, the private sector, provincial commissions, business associations and chambers, but also I think the regulatory bodies like the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan and the Public Procurement authority, all these regulatory bodies as well can, through industry practice, like for example, the London Stock Exchange did come up with a lot of CSR compliance, and there was a comply or explain approach adopted there. So I think similar powers or similar practices can be developed within our own industry regulators as well, so that they can ensure compliance in a semi-soft version as well. So it's not hard law that needs compliance with, but softer industry regulations through which greater compliance can emerge.
Thank you very much, Nida and the group. Colleagues, now we are fast approaching the wrapping up of this riveting session. And it's my duty and a very happy duty to thank all of you for your informed and informative inputs, and also to very, very quickly recap some of the key points and some of the key inputs. Starting from the keynote reflections of Mr. Inamullah Khan, and I think that's a good point of departure, that Pakistan is moving to operationalize National Action Plan. And this process and this commitment from Pakistan in itself manifests Pakistan's own commitment to human rights and business. And he also highlighted the 5 phases of the operationalization of the plan, which really starts and also comes to its conclusion with consultation. That the National Action Plan is now available on the website for public review and feedback. However, we have heard from one of our expert speaker that beyond the website, this needs to also be available to the larger members of the society and of populations who do not have access to digital platforms. And might I add, with that, it might also be very helpful if the National Action Plan is available beyond English, if it already isn't, in Urdu as well. Now, with regards to the group works findings, and as we saw that there is a larger consensus and convergence on the key impediments, barriers, and challenges, which include child labor, which includes implementation or weak implementation of labor standards, which includes harassment at workplace, safety standards and measures, lack of access to work, in particular with the individuals facing various kinds of disability, peoples with disabilities, lack of remedies and grievance mechanisms that really have teeth, that really are tangible, accessible, and are meaningful and are responsive. There was also the question of right to association, and that needs to be looked into very, very deeply. Then there was also convergence around lack of capacity of many of the small and medium enterprises and businesses. We have some very strong and solid recommendations, and these recommendations sort of resonate across the spectrum of 4 groups. So these could fairly be described as shared or collective recommendations. So beginning from the compulsory and mandatory regulation for businesses to adopt the human rights agenda and compliance with corporate social responsibility. Although we also heard that in practicality, it ought to be a combination of 2. There needs to be flexibility for voluntary actions on part of businesses, but there need to be a baseline of key standards which ought to be mandatory. We also heard with regards to call and recommendation for cogent implementation of legislation with regards to human rights and business, with regards to consumer rights, employment rights, with regards to the labor instruments, ILO instruments, and expeditious follow-ups of them. We have heard in the challenges with regards to lack of grievance mechanisms. So naturally, as a consequence, within the recommendations, we have a resounding recommendation with regards to development of standardized grievance mechanism and its implementation across the board. We also have a recommendation with regards to the health, and that is a stark reminder that being of good health does not mean absence of ailment or infirmity. It's a confluence of or presence of many factors, which include social, physical health, which includes access to social protection. So in that sphere, we have a recommendation with regards to looking at the mental health, looking at means, ensuring that people work in enabling, conducive environments. And if people are experiencing mental health or emotional degradation or issues, there ought to be confidential, anonymous, responsive support. There's a big recommendation with regards to SMEs to be included within the BHR, and inclusion means capacity building. It includes monitoring. It includes supporting of technical support, normative support, as it were, and partnerships. We also heard with regards to challenges, the impact of extremist or radicalized activity upon businesses in many areas, and that needs to be looked into. So there's a call for a larger convergence of various policies, protection mechanisms, national action plan on human rights, for example, and those legislations and policies that look into the question of extremist violence or terrorism, radicalization. The recommendation in that regard is with regards to diversity and inclusion, that needs to be ensured. Data protection, privacy laws is another recommendation, which means regulating informal sector and bringing it within the fold of the larger business and human rights agenda, so that even before the baseline or the monitoring of SMEs or smaller businesses starts, we already know that we already should have a framework which is evidence-based and that has already mapped out the small and medium-sized enterprises, and that then further kind of looks into the unmet needs or the unmet capacity needs. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears that last but not the least, even looking at the digital health policy recommendation, it appears that all recommendations that are also symptomatic of what is the lack or the overall lack. They call for voice, which means voice of the communities, voice of the employees, of the consumers, of the general population, and in particular those who are most disadvantaged, marginalized, and excluded, their voice and their priorities to be included within the larger framework of business and human rights. It calls from beyond the voice to visibility, which reminds us that voice or priorities are not enough on their own, but there has to be a visible participation, wider participation and inclusion of all the right holders. And last but not the least, the recommendations remind us that it's not only enough to have voice and visibility, but we also need to have agency of all members of all communities, that businesses regard each one of individual associated with them not as beneficiaries or workers only or laborers only, but as agents of change, not as passive beneficiaries, agents of change whose contributions have impact not only on the businesses, not only upon themselves, but on the larger development, social development and human rights agenda of the nation. Thank you very much indeed. And If I've missed out on any point, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, participants, you'll find detailed notes in the chat rooms also and in the wider report as well. So thank you from my side. Thank you to all the organizers, the technical support, the guides and the mentors who have helped put this session and the entire event together. All the best to all of you. That's all from my side. Thank you.